This episode of Mini Tech Scroll is brought to you by Blackbird, a venture capital firm investing in Aussie and Kiwi startups from the very beginning. Blackbird invests in all kinds of technology, so if you have a big idea but need to raise investment to turn it into reality, learn more and connect with the Blackbird team through the link in our show notes. Hey everyone, and welcome to Mini Scroll, the daily internet culture podcast bringing you the biggest stories from social media, the creator economy, and the digital space every Monday through Thursday and sometimes Fridays. My name is Annabelle, and I am your Wednesday Mini Tech Scroll host, and also the deputy editor of the youth digital media brand Centennial World. Welcome back to Mini Tech Scroll, everyone. Before we get into the stories this week, I have two things to mention. The first is that I got a haircut. I wonder if any of you noticed the difference. My bangs are back. The second thing, though, which is probably more relevant to you guys, is that this episode is actually being pre-recorded. So this is going up tomorrow for me. So it was recorded yesterday for you. If anything monumental happened overnight that is not covered in this episode, that is why. Other than that, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe and star rate us on Spotify. We also have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description if you want to check that out. So yes, let's just get into the stories. The first story we have to talk about today is how an AI minister has recently been appointed in Albania. And no, I don't mean a minister for AI, I mean an AI-generated minister. Last week, the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama became the first leader, making Albania the first country in the world to appoint a cabinet minister powered by AI. So the minister's name is Diela, which reportedly means sun or sunshine in Albanian. If we have any Albanian listeners, please let me know. She does have an avatar where she shows up as a woman dressed in traditional Albanian clothing. The minister's portfolio/role will basically be to tackle corruption and promote transparency in the government. This is seemingly around public procurement, which is the purchase of goods, works, or services by the state. Obviously, this is an area of government that would be susceptible to corruption, and this is something that Albania has also struggled with historically. The Prime Minister explained Diela as the, quote, first member not physically present, but virtually created by artificial intelligence. Reporting from Politico went into more depth about Diela's ministership, so I will just read a quote from that article now. Quote, Rama stated that decisions on tenders would be taken out of the ministries and placed in the hands of Diela, who is the servant of public procurement. He said this process will be step by step, but Albania will be a country where public tenders are 100% incorruptible and where every public fund that goes through the tender procedure is 100% legible. I thought this was really interesting because AI here is positioned as a tool to eliminate bias and judge the contract/tenders/funding from an objective perspective. This is obviously a very different way to view AI from certain topics that we have discussed in the past, especially around how AI harbors bias depending on how it has been trained and what it has been trained on. So the conversation and reaction to Diela online has been reflecting some of these concerns, and it has been very mixed. I have seen some comments from people who are simultaneously intrigued and also worried about how AI will actually limit corruption and whether it actually can. Others are saying that they believe this was more of a symbolic play by the Prime Minister and the Albanian government, because you could probably program an AI bot to allocate funds to certain organizations that the leadership favors, but they kind of wipe their hands clean of any sort of corruption and association with that by using the AI minister. I think there is definitely something to be said around transparency here. At times, it can definitely be difficult to tell how an AI-generated bot or model comes to a certain conclusion, whether that is ChatGPT or a minister like in this case. But when we're dealing with public procurement and issues of state spending, justification and the decision-making process cannot be overstated. It's definitely important to be transparent about. At this time, though, there obviously isn't too much information about Diela and the back end of that, so I do think it's kind of hard to pass judgment on that at this time. Either way, it's definitely a historic move. Between this and everything going on in Nepal, with obviously Lauren reporting on this recently, where a new representative was basically appointed by Gen Z on Discord, it is crazy to see the interaction of social media, AI, politics in this kind of way. I actually don't know if we have any Albanian listeners, but I would love to hear any perspectives that you have about Diela and everything going on with this AI minister. That brings us to our next story. And obviously, the biggest story on the internet in the past week has been about Charlie Kirk's death. Lauren did cover this when the news broke, but more and more is coming out around the shooter's social media presence and his potential affiliation with certain online figures. So this does feel relevant to the podcast, so we thought we would touch on this. I am sure most of you guys are across this story since it is literally everywhere online at the moment, so I don't think we need to get into the nitty-gritty here. But ever since the messages on the bullet cases were revealed to the public, there has been speculation about the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson's political beliefs and online affiliations. If you've been online in the past week or so, you've definitely seen the word groper being thrown around, along with political influences like Nick Fuentes come up in this discussion. There has been a lot of really solid reporting on this from internet culture experts. Ryan Broderick's analysis in the Garbage Day newsletter was pretty comprehensive. I'll link it in the description as well for you guys. And Aidan Walker, who is a meme expert that we've actually had on the podcast before. That's honestly one of my favorite interviews that we have done on the podcast. But he made quite a detailed TikTok about the memes that people are associating with Tyler Robinson. I will insert a clip of that here if you haven't seen it yet, because he honestly explains it better than I ever could.
The casing on the shot that ended Charlie Kirk's life was engraved with a 12-year-old furry bashing meme. Notice his bulge, ooh woo, what's that? Which tells us an important thing. This assassination was a shitpost. That is the lens to analyze it through. It was designed to be maximally disruptive and incomprehensible, cloaked in layer upon layer of irony so that nobody would know what he really meant unless they were our guy. Now, the question everybody's asking is, was this kid a groiper? And the question everybody's parents are asking is, what is a groiper? So groipers are the most extreme fringe of this kind of image board nihilistic culture that I'm talking about. They're led by Nick Fuentes, who is a content creator and a streamer, and they really are about transgressing any boundary that exists. They are like explicitly white nationalists, really bad, horrible people. The name groiper originates from this variant of Pepe the Frog, which comes about in the late 2010s, and these guys adopt it as a kind of collective self-portrait. They make it their profile picture, they make it their moniker. There was the Groiper War of 2019, in which Nick Fuentes and his people trolled Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, showing up at these debate events and asking questions that would push Kirk to say things that were even more extreme than Kirk was already saying. Like many Pepe or Groiper memes, the core of this is a lonely male figure in sort of an immiserated landscape looking sad. And that's part of the story I wish more people were talking about. What's driving our political violence isn't just polarization, where one side is getting more radical and kind of undermining democracy, nor is it algorithms, like some have said, that are like pickling the brains of young people. It is that feeling, which these Pepe memes represent, of you're always going to be alone, you're never going to have a future, and you're never going to have a voice.
Since there is already quite a lot out there, I don't think it's worth us going into this again for you, especially because groipers and the culture and memes around them are quite specialized. But why we wanted to cover this story though today was I think it leads us to a bigger question around how information, specifically information relating to the online world and internet culture, is being covered. When it comes to Charlie Kirk's death and Tyler Robinson's political beliefs, what we have seen so far is that on one side you have social media users who are extremely familiar with people like Nick Fuentes and the white supremacist, misogynistic, homophobic, and anti-Semitic beliefs that he puts forward to his followers. And on the flip side, you have people who have never heard about this side of the internet. Whether Tyler Robinson was actually part of this group or not, I think is a different question here. But the very fact that he could be shows the influence that this niche has on social media users, especially young men. This begs the question, though, why hadn't mainstream media been covering this niche before? And that has left many social media users concerned, especially about the potential of violence down the line. One Threads post I saw, for example, said, quote, TikTokers are doing an infinitely better job explaining the groper situation than any mainstream media outlet aside from TikTokers. Some of the best coverage is coming from various independent journalists, some of whom I've already mentioned. But for media companies to produce similar coverage, they need money and experts in this specific side of the internet. Internet culture and tech reporting is so unbelievably vast. It's impossible to have one journalist do it all. Unfortunately, though, this is what many legacy media brands do, either because they don't have the resources to do this in any other way, or because people making the hiring decisions don't really understand how fragmented this niche actually is. This is especially important because clearly the left-right political binary cannot explain every political act anymore. For example, we have been seeing a lot of commentary on TikTok about accelerationism and how this relates to online political ideology and messaging. But there hasn't really been anything about that in mainstream media, and it really does add important context to Tyler Robinson and just this movement more broadly.
Charlie Kirk's shooter exists politically on the horseshoe, like right in the middle of the horseshoe between right and left. They are so far to the right that they are consequently to the left, and they are so far to the left that they are consequently on the extreme right. There's a lot of variety within this group, but the one thing they come together to agree upon is that nothing means anything, and you should do anything for the laws. That's what it means. Unless you have spent time in these online spaces observing them, it is very difficult to understand. But this was predominantly done for the laws. And then the secondary function of it was accelerationism in order to crumble the societal structure that we currently have now. And that is what it comes down to. And that's partly why people are so conflicted and unable to pin them down. Because no, they're not completely alt-right. And no, they're not completely left. They exist in the middle of the horseshoe of extremism. This group is highly nihilistic in many ways. Most of the reasoning behind it is for the laws. They almost don't care what they believe in, as long as it's funny. And that's what a lot of it comes down to. Is it funny? Does it accelerate chaos and societal collapse? If it checks those two boxes, that's what they're into.
In a similar vein, there is also a conversation going on around access to information and who deserves it, with some of the best coverage around Tyler Robinson and Charlie Kirk coming from independent journalists posting on the likes of Substack, Patreon, or just more general personal newsletters. Consumers obviously have to pay for membership. This conversation, while it has been going around among users, I haven't really been seeing many creators cover it or many mainstream media publications talk about it. So I thought it would be an interesting angle to talk about this story, and also kind of gives you some fresh thoughts around this story because there is so much content going around and we don't want to just add to the conversation to add to the conversation. We want to add something meaningful. Okay, let's move on to the next story. This one is quite a pivot. This story is a platform update where Spotify has recently switched up its free user tier, lifting the shuffle-only listener experience. For context, before this update, free users on Spotify couldn't listen to a specific track. You would have had to have shuffled an album or a playlist before eventually landing on the song you actually wanted to listen to. There was also a limited amount of skips per hour. But Spotify has now introduced, quote, pick and play, search and play, and share and play, which is exactly what it sounds like. It basically just allows users to listen to any song they want immediately. In a statement, though, to The Verge, there are still restrictions around free users and what they want to listen to. As Spotify spokesperson Luke McKay told the publication, quote, only Spotify premium users have complete control to play and skip music without restrictions. Mobile listeners of the updated free experience will be able to tap on any song or search for what they'd like to play. Or if they don't like a track or simply don't want to hear what's next, skip the occasional song and carry on listening. Each user has a daily allocated amount of on-demand time. Once this limit is reached, users will then be limited to 6 skips per hour. I wanted to cover this story because it's obviously pretty good news for free Spotify users, but it also, I think, shows the growing competition between Spotify and other streaming platforms. It has been quite a big conversation online recently, how many Spotify users are seemingly switching streaming platforms, with some of them going to Apple Music. In fact, it was actually recently reported, maybe at the end of August, that Apple Music was rolling out a tool that allows you to import playlists from other streaming services, which was arguably an attempt to court Spotify users. But this back and forth has ultimately seen the streaming platforms both roll out a suite of different features, and including Spotify DMs. I remember people were talking about that as well at the end of last month. All in all, though, when it comes to the free user experience, I think it's definitely positive that Spotify is allowing users to take more control of their listening experience. Streaming platforms are obviously the main way to consume music these days, and the barrier to entry just shouldn't be high, especially when you have so many young people dealing with the cost of living crisis and having to cut back on expenditure to afford the necessities. And who doesn't love listening to music, honestly? Lastly, I have a super quick update about the US TikTok ban. I will keep this short since we have covered the ban extensively at this point, and every time I bring it up, I wish I didn't have to. I feel like I have done at least 7 episodes involving the TikTok ban, and I just can't anymore. But hopefully we are coming to an end of all this because the US and China have allegedly agreed on a framework that will allow TikTok to continue operating in the US. Some officials from the administration spoke to the deal, but not much has been revealed so far. According to reporting from Politico, quote, a White House official granted anonymity to share details that have not yet been made public, said the commercial terms have been agreed to between the parties, but the finalization of the deal is dependent on Trump's call with China's leader on Friday, during which the two leaders will discuss details. So I guess we'll hear more about this later in the week. It will be super interesting to see what ends up happening with the algorithm because that has obviously been a major sticking point so far because it's not something that China wants to sell because it is obviously very powerful. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. Well, that is everything from Mini Tech Scroll today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope the 4 p.m. vibe is not jarring compared to the 9 a.m. vibe, which is like when I usually record. Lauren will speak to you guys tomorrow. I actually won't speak to you guys next week, but there will still be a Mini Tech Scroll episode going up. But yes, thank you for listening. Bye.